Hey, good afternoon, everybody in Theater 4. Theater 4 is about to fire up. If you're in the audience and you want to come down, come on down. Fire up probably was not a good term to use right now. I'll give you a minute just to get settled, and we'll get Mr. Andrews up here, and he'll go to town here and catch up in just a second. I'm Mike Warlick from AFCEA International, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. But first of all, I appreciate the response by everyone a while ago. This looks like a small grease fire. We created this, and probably the smart move is to do what we did, but it was quite an interesting 30 minutes, wasn't it? We're all back, everything's safe, and we'll get back to business. It's my pleasure to introduce your speaker this afternoon, Mr. Dan Andrew, Systems Architect from Army CECOM Software Engineering Center. In his role, Dan oversees a systems view of how SEC's people, processes, and equipment combine to perform software sustainment mission. He focuses on identifying and implementing changes to improve the software readiness of fielded systems. He left the service at the Coast Guard in 1998 and decided to come back in business in 2009 as a software project manager for the Army Installation Management Command, and he has grown from that point to where he is today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Andrews to the stage.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you all decided to come back. I wasn't sure whether everybody was blaming me for pulling the fire alarm, as that would be a sure way that wouldn't be anybody in the audience to hear me talk. All right. Am I loud enough? Let's just do a sound check. It's kind of very strange in this room. Not loud enough. I didn't think so. All right. Down. Turn it up back there. Oh, now we're sounding better. Okay. All right. So, what am I going to talk about today? So, this title, really, there's key words in this title, and we're going to kind of work through all of them. But it is adapting DevSecOps to improve legacy. And I shouldn't have in here Army. I mean, it's obviously it's Army because of Army stuff, but improve legacy Army software readiness. Right. All right. So we'll start with kind of looking at some of the terms that are in that title, so we've got a good common frame of reference. And the first is going to be software readiness. Now, I've got to thank, if anybody sat and listened in with Dr. Iyer, the Army CIO, just a few minutes ago, he set me up pretty well with talking about the Army Cyber Readiness Framework and how this is a significant kind of transformational activity that's going on, which really is taking that concept that now, just like in the past, equipment could be determined to be not ready, not mission capable because of a hardware failure, flat tires, insufficient oil pressure in an engine, all these sort of very obvious things that while that piece of equipment now can't operate. As we're moving into so much more of a software-centric world, the Army is now realizing is putting in place this software Army Cyber Readiness Framework that says, on a very similar level, if your software is not up to date and properly patched, then that's the equivalent of having some equipment breakdown, and that system is not mission capable. And just like in the reporting structures for if you can't fly the helicopter, if you can't operate your vehicle, if you can't fire your weapon, just like for all those, you'd have to report that your unit was not ready to perform its mission because of equipment deficiencies. Same thing now for software, right? And that is a really transformational thing. And you can see here that within the framework, what they've said is that there's kind of two portions of this. One is you have to be on an identified and supported software baseline. Or, and the way this is said is, or you have to, if the way they look at it is your system must be deadlined if you're not on that software based on an approved baseline, or you're not patched within 30 days of the last patch update that was sent out by the sustainment organization for that software system. So that's that like I said, that's a big deal. If you have any involvement with systems out there, operational systems out in the armed forces, getting those patch updates in place and processed frequently, as often as once a month, things that's been a big challenge, right? But now this is recognizing that is a critical thing to be done, and tying it to, if it's not done, then the commanders need to report that equipment as not operationally ready for their mission. So that, like I said, that is a big transformation, as Dr. Iyer referenced. So how does this tie to DevSecOps, right? So with DevSecOps, you'll hear a lot of the things about trying to create these systems that have these automated pipelines that go end to end, right? So the concept of DevSecOps, right, is I'm going to really pull on this fact that it's a culture and philosophy about practices, right? When you'll see the benefits that are in here of DevSecOps, right, is to reducing time to production, decreasing your change failure rate, baking in cybersecurity, right? So these are a lot of things that can be tied closely to the time element to that readiness concept, right? Of that 30 days being updated on time. And so now you've got this concept of the systems and all of the logistical train that supports that, making the changes, updating them, and getting them into the field and installed. They've got to be able to support that same rapid pace of change as well, right? So it's not just at the point of where the installation happens, right? But if we can't move quickly through that whole process of things, then we're not going to be able to meet the ultimate objective, which is, making, faster changes to increase the security, right? And again, as Dr. Iyer said, he talked about, it's a very dynamic and fluid environment, and the threats of today are not the threats of tomorrow. And if we're not able to rapidly identify the new threat, respond to it, and make the software changes and get them fielded quickly, all the time that there is an unmitigated vulnerability out there, or a threat, that is all opportunity for the enemy to attack it and use it. So the longer it takes us to close that, the more risk there is. So speed is really an enormous component of this, right? And DevSecOps has a lot of elements within it, concept for speed, for making things go faster, using automation, thinking about the cycle time, how to make the changes go faster, and not just faster in small context, but all the way through the end-to-end life cycle. Okay. So where does the CCOM Software Engineering Center fit within this component here? So one of the interesting is, so we're part of the Computer Electronics Command Lifecycle Management Committee, where our mission is to sustain the software of fielded and operational systems, right? So we are not inherently a software development organization. We are not the PO shop. We are not the systems integrators. Our role really comes into focus after the system has been initially fielded, production has ceased, and now it needs to maintain operations in the field. As historically we've seen the Army systems, 25, 30 years, right? And a software life cycle, boy, that's an extremely long time, right? So you see that, but we now have this same requirement of that Army Cyber Readiness framework applies not only to all the modernization and the new systems that are coming out, but it applies to the systems that are fielded today, which are the systems that if we need to fight tonight, we're going to fight with the systems that are fielded. Not many of the systems that, most of this conference, you hear everybody's talking about, the future timeframes and the modernization efforts, but we deal with literally what is fielded today, right? Making changes to systems that are out there operationally at the edge right now in the soldiers' hands. And you can kind of see a list of, we're focused mostly in command and control, C5ISR, we've got some business system things. So what does that mean? Again, looking at the DevSecOps context of that. So a lot of times you go to DevSecOps discussions, and one of the things you see is a slide something like this, which has a whole bunch of these are the technologies. These are all the automations you're going to need to do. You got to be containerized. You got to be in the cloud. You got to have this pipeline of support every vendor out here for every booth, right? And build this thing together. And that's how, when you have that, you have DevSecOps. Well, when you're dealing with a system that was developed and fielded 10 years ago, when almost none of these technologies were even on the maps, what do you do, right? If DevSecOps is purely this, you're entrenched in having to have the technologies to make it go. Right? And so there's been a lot of folks would say, oh, you guys do sustainment of legacy, you're not in the DevSecOps game. Don't go there, right? But I disagree with that completely, right? Because if we went back to that definition of DevSecOps, it starts with it's a culture and philosophy, right? Of reasons for doing things. Certainly these technologies enhance it, and if you really want to get all of the benefits of it, you need to be moving toward these kinds of technologies. But you can certainly work toward it now with what you already have by implementing creative. So this is where the adapt portion of that title comes, right? So a lot of folks say we're adopting DevSecOps. Well, we're adapting DevSecOps, right? Because we can't just adopt this pie in the sky, this forward-looking, all new capability model of things. So what does that look like, right? So we're focused instead on that culture portion. So one of the things we've done within our organization, right, is by taking this, all right, we're thinking in this DevSecOps concept and cultural thought, what does that mean? How do we need to then change what we do? So until fairly recently, within the center, because our role was sustainment of the deployed functionality that's out there, we really looked at what our job was. The project management office said there some change needed to be made to the software, whether it was apply these patches or there needs to be a little bit of a functional change. Make that change. We would adjust the software as needed, test it, and then go through a release process to validate that it was still interoperable, met all of the accreditation needs, things like that. And then we would say, here we go, it is released. And we'd essentially kind of put it on a shelf and say, there you go, you can have it. And we measured our success with how quickly could we do that little bit, right? And when we got to the release, that was like we're done. What's the next change going on? What's the project manager going to tell us next change? So one of the big fundamental changes just in mindset, and again, this is it has nothing to do with all those technological tools, is now looking at it as we've got to be, even though we're sustaining legacy, thinking in that complete end-to-end development, security, and operations end, and having responsibilities there and ensuring that we are integrating tighter with them, working with those communities, right? And how can we do that even with the legacy framework, right? So all the way from not just waiting for folks to tell us changes need to be made, but how can we identify the changes that should be made, right? Help speed that cycle up, right? Because again, there's you've got that clock started that when a vulnerability is found, as soon as the vulnerability is out there, we've got to first identify it. But because it's out there, if the enemy identifies it before we identify it, now they've got that clock of their ability to attack it and exploit it is there, right? Even though we may not even know it's there, right? So the faster we can find them, that shortens the time that it can be exploited. Then you got to, work through how do you make that change. The faster you do that and test it and get it released. And then there's a whole portion of things about getting it from us as, okay, we've released this, but now actually being responsible and say, how do we speed up and ensure that it actually gets distributed to all of the right endpoints and installed so that the soldiers are actually using it. Because until that happens, right, that attack surface, that ability for the enemy to exploit it is available that entire period of time. And if we don't have the mindset of doing everything we can to shorten it, then we really aren't helping a whole lot by taking a very suboptimal, we're just going to focus on our little bit, right? So that's a big thing that we're doing. And again, we're not wherever we can, automation for sure, but not stuck with the fact that we're not doing DevSecOps. We're not thinking that way because we can't get that completely end-to-end automated pipeline in place due to the fact that the system architectures don't support it. Okay. All right. So what are some of the kind of specific things that we've looked at? So one of them, kind of toward that beginning, is how do we identify sooner, better, with more completeness? What are the potential vulnerabilities out there, right? And so, doing software assurance. Yep, you got a quick question. So the question is, how does DevSecOps shorten the time to the vulnerability, right? So a lot of the measures within DevSecOps of the DORA measures and things are about your speed of time to be able to deploy, your speed to recover from a system down, or speed for being able to roll back, and if you do have a failed install, right? So there are a lot of time metrics in there, and so part of this is it's security. So that the sec portion in that DevSecOps is the security that's just inherent in speed, right? So that there is a speed that, like I said, the faster we can go through this cycle, the shorter the time frame that the enemy has to attack, right? So I know it's a different. That's why I say this is adapting DevSecOps. It's not the traditional way that folks come at DevSecOps. A lot of so I totally get that, right? So it's taking that thing of looking at, how can you look at that a little bit different? That it's not this focus of automated tools, but instead, speeding up shortening that cycle time is a component of that DevSecOps thing, and leveraging that and doing things to enhance that. So, all right. So again, one of the big things is how do we better identify the vulnerabilities? So we've got a lot of work within the center of doing software assurance at the code level, and being able to identify what vulnerabilities are in our software portfolio, right? Without solely relying on vendors saying, well, we've got this patch, you need this, here, but bringing in the software and running it through a collection of different tools to scan the code, to analyze the code dynamically, statically, dependency analysis, all these sorts of things, and generate a hit list of here are findings of potential risk. Now, so a lot of things would go to that level, right? You can run lots of tools and things, you can get this enormous list of here are all your potential findings, right? But something else that we bring to that is now then trying to provide some context to help with an engineering analysis and the understanding of the context of the systems, the software that we're looking at, being able to sort through all of those, false positives that might be in there of just a straight scan with no context, no understanding of the system and how it's architected and used, right? So to work through that and create a much more targeted list of here's where changes really should be made, not just this enormous list of here's all the scanned findings. And then taking that and rolling that back through, along with bringing experts from the actual system itself to create then some machine learning algorithms, right? So that we can more quickly go through by saying, okay, let's take a small subset of the findings, run through it, identify how those relate to the system, and then let the machine through, with machine learning from that, be able to run through the rest of the set. Because those scan result finding sets can be big, thousands and thousands of findings when you do initial. And it can take a long time to individually go through those, right? So we're trying to, if possible, apply the machine learning to, again, speed that cycle up so that we're not waiting for that. And then creating good reports that can go back to the actual developers and the code level sustainers to say, here now is the targeted list of things to fix, right? And again, not just this enormous list of possible things, but we recommend this and provide it both for a developer level as well as then at an executive level, so that the system owners stuff can understand where the risk now lies within their system. Right? So that's one thing. And finally, tracking over time. Getting through is cyclical, because you're not going to get everything the first time through, but cyclically doing this on a periodic basis, both for new systems that are transitioning to us for sustainment, so we know where they start, as well as systems we already have, and watching us, continually burn down that risk. And again, because we know that the vulnerability list changes over time, just because, this was the set of findings at this point in time, 2 years later, you run the same thing with a whole new, different vulnerability library, you get different findings, right? So you can't stop. So continuing on that. So software assurance, that's a big portion of what we're doing. And the next stage, we're trying to move this. So we've been doing this a lot in a kind of a disconnected mode. Now we're taking a lot of what we've learned here and how do we help with where we can implement those code scanning tools in line with the pipeline type thing. Also take the knowledge of this engineering analysis and the machine learning and apply that so that developers also get a better understanding of what's coming out and can action it better than just purely, here's all the results that came from my mistake. All right, automated testing. So in our end-to-end cycle, one of the places that was really a big slowdown was testing, right? As any change that would come through, we'd have very extensive and manual test procedures that would have been given to us by the original developers of it. And so here's your test procedures, almost all manual, and it takes a long time to run. And so in the cycles, we're trying to get into monthly releases. We really end up with the systems we had. A large portion of the time of that 30 days was dedicated to the testing, and we only had the ability to run the test once, right? Because it just took so long, end to end, to run these tests. And so it sucked up an enormous amount of resources, both in time and just people, which were basically doing, button clicking through the UI, trying to run all the different possible threads to see where, even if it's just deploying patches, did any of the patches break the functionality? And it was high risk. Normally testing is supposed to be a risk reduction sort of thing, but here it really became pretty high risk because we only had the opportunity to do it once. And if we did find, something broke, and you had made, applied 20 patches to different components and things, functionality broke here, is often very difficult to make that trace of, well, which patch caused the failure, right? And we would be getting those results on like day 28 of when we were supposed to be releasing for a 30-day cycle, right? So our time to go back, so then it put us into these things of, well, do we release again anyway, even though we know there's this issue? Do we roll back, right? And so it became risky because we were just, the testing wasn't helping. It was causing delays, but it wasn't really providing us a lot of value to help us be able to fix the problems. So we've had a big effort. It's probably been about 5 years now or so, moving to automated testing and utilizing tools. And this has been difficult because the tests were not built in. We're literally starting with stacks of, here you go, here's that paper-based test plan, boom, and having to work through how do you automate that? And there's a lot of then restructuring the architecture of a test and the test flow that you do once you can start automating and getting it into modular constructions. Plus then there's just what are the automated tools, testing tools out there that can interface with that legacy component, right? Whether you're trying to work over a 1553 bus in aviation, you're trying to work on a RS-232 interface. Sometimes we would have Ethernet. There's all many different managed ways to interface, right? So it makes it. There's not just one way that we could say this is how we do it, right? So we've automated so far about 6,000 tests across the center. We're about at the numbers, that's about halfway through. It's a little bit hard to say apples to oranges 1-to-1, because it's also driven us to go through an opportunity to relook at the testing. And are we testing the right things? As we're more in this sustainment mode, are we testing things that we think it's likely that patches are going to break, right? And so we can focus in on that. Now we've got the ability where we can run them, on demand, right? So you've got this list of 20 patches. You implement one of the patches, run the test, see if that's the one that broke. Nope, and go on, right? So we can do that at a much more incremental. We also, because they can a lot of times run headless and stuff, you can kick it off at night. At the end of the day, runs overnight, come back, and you've got the reports are ready for you in the morning, instead of having it be personnel on site, 16 hours of clicking through the buttons and manually recording, and then all those things. So now we actually are driving and reducing risk by doing this, plus speeding up the whole process. Now, one of the things, though, that it does do is it changes your skill set of what you need in testers now, right? Because previously, a lot of our testers were experts in the system and how to functionally operate on the screen. Well, now our tester becomes coding, right? So you've got to be able to code to create automated test scripts. Automated test scripts are coding. And so here's another place where DevSecOps comes into place, right? Is the DevSecOps concept of everything as code, right? And managing test scripts the same way you would manage your actual executable code, right? Maintaining it in a good code management repository, right? Having modular construction for it, keeping it well configuration managed, doing patching against your testing infrastructure, all of those things, right? So all the DevSecOps. So here's a place where now we use, a lot of folks say, well, we don't do any development with the SEC, we just do the sustainment. Well, developing automated test scripts, that is a development activity. And all of those DevSecOps things can apply just right internal to ourselves, where we're developers, and the ops portion is in executing the test. All right. So now we've talked about speeding up, finding changes that need to be made. We have made the change, testing it, places where we had things. The big challenge, though, then is taking it from that after we've released, here are the changes, we've tested them, this is what we want, getting it downstream out to the field, right? So in the past, probably 5 years ago or less, which is sort of scary to think about, it was a very physical process. Literally, we had an organization, it was after things were released, that would take master copy of the software and burn it to CDs and DVDs, and by the thousands, right? And so you get a 30-day update for a system, and here's this, it would turn out to a stack of 25 DVDs, which then, those 25 DVDs have to be mailed out to the 3,000 units that have that system. And we put them in the mail, and then they start going, wow, right? I mean, just think about if you're trying to deal with that software readiness framework of 30 days time, right? And you're dependent upon the mail, right? And you're trying to get mail, into AFRICOM units, right? You're trying to get them, into Iraq. You're trying to get them into Afghanistan. You don't get, the post every day, but Sunday, right, on those places. So that was a very cumbersome system there. So again, DevSecOps, right? So this is kind of looking now in that ops portion of, even though, is this really an issue of the sustainers? There was discussion on it, but what can we do to speed that up, right? So first thing, which seems pretty obvious, but took a while to get in place, was creating a digital repository where folks could just go and download the software, not have to wait for the mail, right? And be able to download it. So that is in place now. And an initial first increment of that is online operating both on Nipper and Zipper, where every release that we produce, we put out there. Now, that's not the only way. There still are some where, because not everyone has the connectivity. Sometimes the updates are large file sizes. The bandwidth isn't necessarily so. So there is still the ability to do a on-request mail connection or other delivery methods. But this has significantly reduced the timeline to get things out the door and into the hands of the users. Now, we want to go further than that, right? And so we're actively working to build out what we're calling this CCOM Software Repository 2.0, which is going to shift from being hosted managed service by DISA to now we're actually developing this using, again, in Dr. Iyer's talk, he talked about the Create DevSecOps pipeline that goes directly into the CRM cloud, right? And so we're using that, we're building a cable so that we will now have the ability to, again, much more rapidly add capability into that repository, because that, it's going to become a really critical cornerstone of this whole architecture of getting stuff, is having that repository with lots of functionality, both from the user end to pull stuff, but also a place where we can start to get some monitoring back of who's downloaded, how frequently they downloaded it, right? We can start to tie that connection. You had a question? No, so I don't want to. That's not what we're doing. What we are moving it through there to using Create is just the repository where we can upload the updates to the fielded systems within folks, but we're not making it so that the fielded systems are now running in the cloud, right? Because many of our systems, are ones that are deployed, right? The radio software, your. I'm sorry? Well, so a lot of the other modernization things are looking at how do they move that functionality to the cloud, right? So that's more in that, the new development realm of things. So some of the in sustainment programs, they do have modernization elements being managed by their PMs to move them in, to cloud enable them. But again, that's more being done by the PM shops. Where we can, it's not really a traditional sustainment thing. We do have capabilities within the center to do that reimbursably in support of the PMs, but that's kind of a different thing, right? It's a different animal. We're talking here about the infrastructure that supports whatever system being able to quickly move it out to whatever the endpoint is.
So you mentioned that you aren't going towards completely automated pipelines and that your infrastructure hosting is being done by you, but are you leveraging infrastructure as code to achieve that? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah. So because of time, there's components of this that I didn't pull out, but yes, we definitely are, where we can, infrastructure as code for our infrastructure, and we'll see a little bit of that in a couple more slides. So let's just kind of hold on to that. But yeah, absolutely, infrastructure as code is a huge portion of this. Okay, I think I've got everything off of this slide. All right, so we're going to do a little bit going around full circle now, right? Back to that software readiness and the Army cyber readiness framework, right? So again, there was a XORD signed a little over a year ago now for a pilot, to see, okay, is it really possible to do this, right? To say, hey, units, you got to have your software up to date within 30 days. Is that possibly done, right? How can you do it? And so we worked very hard in creating, and without trying to build it, taking the idea, well, in order to make this happen, we've got to all this new stuff. What can we do with existing components and elements that are out there in the ecosystem, and leverage them to make this happen, right? So there's a huge system that's been around for years for managing this same sort of thing for the hardware side, right? Okay, on a vehicle, you now have to swap out part version A for part version B at a hardware level. How do you do that, right? So there's a system out there called the Modification Management Information System, where they can send it down there, right? And there are the maintenance warrants and maintenance staffs at the units who are looking at that and they're saying, oh, look, we've been told for every instance of this vehicle, we now need to swap part A for part B. Where to get part B, what to do with those sorts of things. And then there's a set of procedures called the Preventative Maintenance Checks and Services that are written within the technical manual for all this to say, All right, on a weekly basis, you have to check the tire pressure. On a monthly basis, you have to check your oil pressure. All these things that you have to do, very hardware centric, which all lead up to then determining whether that system is ready. So we looked at how can we just dovetail with that from the software side, right? So what we're doing now is, the first thing that we're doing now for every release of software is we're sending out a maintenance information message. So just like those things that used to say change part A to part B, we now are sending out for that system. There's now a new software version. You need to apply that software version, and within 30 days in order to remain compliant, right? So that was a big thing, right? The next was being able to have a place, right? In the repository is a spot to this where you can get that, right? So now you don't have to wait for the CDs to show up, but you get this message saying there's a new software version out there. Where do I go? You can go right to the repository and download it. Right? Again, that just speeds everything up. If you're thinking the way it used to be, we would send out emails, not using a centralized system here, but every, DSIGs had one set of mailing lists, and FATIDs had a different set of mailing lists, right? And when we did a release, we'd send a message out, but it was not centrally controlled. It was not holistic. People moved around. So a lot of times, the only reason they would know that a change was there, that needed was when the disc showed up. Ooh, here you go. Wow, you just got 10 new CDs to do. Now, right when it's released, we send out this message, and it says you can go proactively get it from here, or if you need a physical copy, let us know and we'll send it to you. Right. So again, shortening that up. Then we've also added into this preventative maintenance checks and services the idea that you need to, on a monthly basis, check the version of software that you're on. Right. And are providing tools to be able to say, with a click of the button, what version am I on? It tells you. And then a central spot back there at the repository where you can look up what is, if we back to the very first slide, we said, what is the supported baseline and what is the last patch level that was released, right? So you have to be able to find that information. So now we've got a central spot where you can go back there and you can look that up. You compare it to when you do your system check, button, click that, it says you're on this baseline, this was the patch level, compared to what's the published, the supported one. If those two things match, you're good to go. You can report your system as fully mission capable. If they don't match, then it becomes I need to do a patching. I need to do some sort of update, right? And then they can go in through the repository and find all that information of whatever they need to bring themselves up, whether they're 1 month behind or a year behind, right? Bring themselves up to standard. If for some reason they can't, they don't have the bandwidth, and it's going to take 3 weeks for the physical delivery to be there, or for some reason they try to apply the patch and it doesn't take, and for some reason they're not able to come into compliance with that idea of what their system is reporting for their current software baseline and patch level is what is posted as the supported baseline and patch level. Then that's when they are to report via the unit status report functionality that system is not mission capable for maintenance due to them being out of compliance in their software. And within GCCS Army, there are now codes that have been added to that where they can indicate that the reason for that not mission capable deadlining of the equipment is based on software. So we can start now to mine that information, identify, are we seeing trends of certain units or certain systems or certain locations, or where we're consistently seeing things become deadline because they're not up to date, right? So again, we didn't, only a couple pieces that were added to what already existed in this ecosystem, but now, we're now using that and leveraging it, right? And so to me, this is that ops side. So now we are very much more connecting the dev folks with the ops folks through this pattern, even though none of these are on that, these are your DevSecOps technology slides, right? But it's the thinking of DevSecOps, not you have to have certain tools for DevSecOps that we're trying to apply here. Okay. So that's kind of where we are now. Where do we want to go, right? So we're all thinking, man, we are not done, right? I'm sure if everybody sat back and looked at it, boy, there are lots of gaps and holes in that. And we absolutely agree. There's lots of gaps and holes. And we're always continually now looking to where can we speed it up? Where can we find a gap, improve, do more? So one of the big things, again, in patching software is the transmission time and the bandwidth of transmission is really a critical limiting factor for what we do. And in our old paradigm of set of IAVOs, right? We're watching there, we're looking at Patch Tuesday comes through, here's a set of patches, we bring them in, apply to the system, we test them, we roll them out, and then we kind of bundle it all up in a set of CDs, or even using the software repository, each system will get its own, here's your new set, right? Send that down the line. So if you think about it, if you've got many systems that are running, on a Microsoft operating system, think how many times we were sending essentially the same patch, KB content through the network for all the different, once for each different system, even though they're all on Microsoft, it would be the same patch content, right? That's an enormous waste of one of the precious resources of bandwidth, right? And it would slow things down. Plus, there was all of that delay of, while we were testing and things, and then we get to that release, and then we start the send. So now we're trying to move more to a concept of where can we parallelize and optimize that by saying, okay, when a patch gets released, stick with Microsoft just for that, but it can apply to just about any other being externally patched. Right? Bring that in, and right away have a path where we can push that patch content through the network before we've even gone in and evaluated it. Right? Get it moving down the line, because there are out there on the network that are not project of record systems, right? They're just locally maintained and configured, and they need this patch content too. And a lot of them struggle with getting a hold of the patch content. So if we can set up a single, path for sending that content, so these right away, so they are going to be able to, rapidly have that content pushed down, start patching those non-program of record systems right away. Right? Then, well. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Dan, I hate to interrupt you because you're on a roll, but I've got to go to another theater, but I want to just make a couple comments. One, you're going to town on this, and I want to thank you. CCOM right now is having a industry open house today, and somehow they let him get down here to talk to us today. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Appreciate that, and I appreciate what you've had to say. I'm gonna walk off, and I don't think you have something right on your back door here. So okay. If you could get a chance to answer some questions, go for it. Okay.
All right.
On behalf of your session today, we're going to make a donation to the Fisher House for our wounded warriors, and for you and all the other speakers here too.
Excellent.
For being so patient with that incident we had a little bit earlier.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So where was I? Yeah. So get that patch content out there. So it's starting to already flow down all of the communication paths while we're in the lab doing our analysis of does the patch break anything, right? And being able to assess that. And once we make that determination of nope, that patch didn't break anything, then we can just send a signal down to say for these systems that patch is cleared to be applied. And it's already moved down there. It's already close, in place for the systems, and they can just apply it. So Microsoft's used to be SCCM, now it's MECM. I can't remember exactly what the acronym there is, but it has a lot of that capability there. And fortunately, systems have been deployed already have that. So a lot of that infrastructure is already in place at the units. It just wasn't being leveraged to this full capability. So again, we didn't have to go re-architect a whole lot of things, deploy a bunch of new technologies and tools. And how could we take advantage of it in order to speed these things up? So this is very, newly, being worked on and rolled out. We've had a few unit touch points, working with units to try this out and things. But again, it's that taking a new look at things. How can we speed things up? How can we break down the old, wall, move things faster, and everywhere we can, make it faster and easier. And so then the next thing here, so the last bit was, even though we might get the software into the hands, the installation component, right? In the old days with the CDs and stuff, a lot of times we had the time it took to install the patch, the change, the update. Once it went through all these other things we talked about, could be hours to days. So we're taking a lot of time now to also look at how can we rethink about the installation procedures, right? And, reduce the time that the system is, out of service, the downtime caused by the installs. Can we do installs while it's live? Plus, a lot of the barrier for getting patches in place is they get their CDs, but they knew that there was going to be a couple days to do it, of working it, and our accuracy of was it going to break something? A lot of times things would break, right? So there's another big DevSecOps thing is change failure rate, right? So how do we monitor and reduce our change failure? So now we're also looking at how do we automate the installation? How do we change the way we package things so we're sending much smaller changes at a time that can be applied quickly, at times that are convenient for the operations and don't, force interruptions. And again, but that still is all stuff we can do within the current technological architectures without having to make these seismic change to different technologies. All right. That's all I've got. I'm more than open for questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. And I've got some ringers here who may also be able to, provide some assistance questions. Any questions? Anybody? All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'll be around if you want to talk about anything further. I really appreciate it.